Transport Overview Scrutiny Committee, Thursday, the 8th of November. How time flies. We have Mr. Harrison, who's substituting Mr. Bremner. Welcome, Mr. Harrison. I know your first name's Dan. We use first names on this committee. You don't mind? Thank you, Dan. Okay. And we also have Mrs. Seatonby covered by Hillary. How are you, Hillary? Looking well? Got a busy weekend with the services this weekend at the memorial. We must never forget. Okay. So welcome to officers as well. The agenda to today's environment, I would like to remind everyone at this meeting that it is broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can everyone please switch the microphones on when they're speaking? I'm sure you're aware by now that when you do use a microphone, it automatically works the camera to shine on your face. Okay? And when you finish speaking, press the button so we turn the microphone off. I've mentioned apologies from Bremner and Seaton. We've mentioned substitutes. You'll be already aware the intention will be discuss the agenda's item 8 and 10 this morning. Then we've got a break for lunch, and we can reconvene at 2 p.m. to reconsider Agenda 11, the development of the unitary structure at the local government in Leicester. We have other officers turning up for that in the afternoon that have been scheduled. I was hoping potentially we could go with the flow, but it wasn't available. Just an announcement, a sad one. I didn't know the gentleman, but there was a gentleman called Mr. Tommy Thompson who long-serving members and officers will know him, who worked a lot alongside him. He was part of this committee, and he's the former Director of Planning and Transportation. I do gather his nickname was Tarmac Thompson, which I'm sure he'd like to be called. I'm sure he would smile at that wherever he is, God bless him. He was a Principal Assistant County Surveyor. He went on to become Director of Planning and Transportation in 1988 and served the post right through to 1997. I would ask all members to stand in silent tribute in memory of Mr. Thompson. Thank you. We have quite a long day today, but when you hear of people passing, it puts things into perspective sometimes. In reality, people come and go, and it does put things in the real light of things. So we'll move on. By all means.
I regarded Tommy as a personal friend, and I'm devastated to hear this news this morning. He was part of that team of officers when this county council was such a powerful body, and he instituted a whole range of massive capital projects across the city and county. At a time when this county council was in a position to support the airport for a start, massive rail improvements, road bypasses. So much was initiated in County Hall, and initiated by Tommy in particular. He was a force of nature, and we can see you can see now the work that he and his team actually initiated by so many capital projects which have been successfully pursued since his time. And this county council owes him a great debt for everything he put into the job. I'm terribly sorry to hear this news.
Thank you for those words, and I think all the members here today, new ones and old ones, and old and new officers, appreciate your words. Thank you very much. We go on to agenda item number 1. And that is the minutes held not too long ago, October 2018, on the 11th. I propose the minutes of the meeting on the 11th be taken, read and confirmed and signed. Can I have somebody second? Yeah, propose, agreed, thank you. Question time. No questions have been received. Number 3. Agenda. Questions asked by members under standing order. I have received no questions from members. Number 4. To advise of any items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. I have not been notified of any urgent items. Declaration of interest in respect to items on the agenda. Do any members of any interest may they wish to declare? Blake. Sorry, I assume that all the members who are different.
Just before I declare my specific interest, I'm not sure whether you needed the microphone on to place it on the record or not. Yeah, my specific interest is the usual, as we're dealing with the annual performance report and the unitary status. If we touch upon passenger transportation in specific taxis, I have relatives that own a taxi business in Leicestershire. So can I declare a personal, non-prejudicial interest? Thanks.
Good to see that you're taking a good lead from the chairman here, growing something on your face. So well done. Yes, Max.
I beg your pardon, Janice. On the question of double-hatted interest, I think it is particularly appropriate that they be minuted in this meeting, whereas they're not, whereas they're just normally taken for granted. And just a question, really, when we speak about the item we're going to deal with this afternoon, it has been the practice that we speak from the point of view of the interests of the county council. I'm not trying to steer the debate in any way, I'm just asking for clarification on that particular point.
That's a fair point. We are county, because I think your microphone's left on, Max. I think that's a fair point. I think from a county council point of view, as county councillors, I think the discussion will be, I believe that we'll be asking questions, the impact on the county council, its relationship with the districts. So there is that overlap, as we're going to find out, and we're aware, partnership working, etc. So I'll turn to Mo on this and just get advice on this.
I think Mr. Hunt is right. If you look at the articles of the Constitution, Article 2 of the Constitution requires all county councils to act in the capacity to which they were elected to the county council and not to speak on behalf of any other local authority whilst acting as a county councillor.
Are we clear on that? Okay. I'm sure we'll address that more this afternoon anyway. I'm sure that we can discuss that and it'll raise its head this afternoon. Section 6, declaration of the party whip. Do members have any declaration? Well, I've had no declaration for the party whip. No. We go straight on to 7, presentations, petitions. There are no presentations or petitions. 8, we go now on to the agenda. This item is risk-based management approach. So I'll hand over to Han, who have just been discussing a briefing on this, to address this and a little bit of a presentation. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report will be a presentation or a risk-based approach to highway asset management. Just to remind members, we are moving how we maintain our highways in accordance with government's latest code of practice. This really sets out the role in terms of we assess how we address and manage and maintain our highways on a risk-based approach. It move us very much more to focusing on preventative works rather than reactive, and changing that balance, and also ensuring that we maximise our funding opportunities for government by showing we're complying with that. I will just now apologise to members who happened to be at the all-member briefing we did last month, because you will hear a lot of the same information, but I'm sure, as you'll appreciate, it is a fairly complex concept. Therefore, hopefully you'll still find it useful, however, to hear that information again. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Lynn Stinson, who's our Asset Management and Major Projects Manager, and she'll briefly take you through the presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's quite a lengthy and complex presentation. I understand that you've had a hard... Apologies. I understand that obviously you've got a copy of it in the papers that you've got in front of you, so I'm not proposing to go through it sort of line by line, but just really highlight some of the major points. So the purpose of the presentation really is to raise awareness of the Code of Practice, and it's part of a series of presentations and updates that we've done to stakeholders and to members, just to appreciate the basic principles of risk management and what a risk-based approach means in practice, along with some of the key steps that we've needed to take and that we still need to take. Gaining awareness of the positive and, to a certain extent, negative aspects of the new code, and to provide an update on the progress that we've made on this. Just a very brief background, really. As a highway authority, we've worked for a number of years under a code of practice that put in place quite sort of defined response times and defects, issues in the highway that we needed to deal with. The new Code of Practice was requested by local authorities, particularly because with reducing funding, we can't necessarily manage our highways in the same way. So this code and the publication of it in 2016 and the subsequent statement of adoption last month is to address that. It's to allow authorities to prioritise the funding that they have where the biggest risk is. So where there are issues and concerns, problems, defects in the highway, we can address the ones that pose the most risk to users of the highway, and those that are of lesser risk, we potentially can leave a little longer before they are dealt with. It's about supporting local needs and priorities, but also potentially freeing up funding as well for more preventative works. So going out and dealing with the problems that have occurred, it's much better for us to be able to put funding into preventing those problems occurring in the first place. So preventing the risk occurring as opposed to trying to manage the risk after it's happened. I won't go through the structure of code. It is a complex document, and it has pulled together 3 or 4 previous pieces of code that dealt with street lighting, with highways and other areas. But there is some information there, and obviously feel free to contact us for any information on that. Just really a risk and what it is. Very simple sort of dictionary type description. It's just a threat. It's an uncertain event that might happen, and if it does, it could have consequences. They could be minor, they could be major. We also have opportunities, so there are opportunities where there may be something that we can choose to do or choose not to do, which can have a positive or a negative effect in the future. But a risk is really around managing the likelihood of the risk occurring, looking at the impact that it could have. So why do we need to manage a risk? Obviously, we've got a plan. We're going to maintain the highways. We're going to make sure that everyone can move from A to B. It's highly likely in reality that's what happens. Things occur. We live in an unpredictable world, whether that be through weather, the hot summer that we've just had, a cold winter that we had last winter, increasing traffic. We have developments that occur in different locations that potentially they maybe have heavy HGV usage. There's all sort of different reasons why what we plan to do with the roads may not be what we can do in reality. So a risk-based approach for any organisation and in our personal lives as well is where we put something in place to manage risk, and it just helps us to understand and evaluate where we need to spend funding, where we need to prioritise funding, and take action to manage those risks. It's really important that we have evidence for a risk-based approach, because it may be that some defects, some issues, some problems are left longer than people would perhaps like in an ideal world, would prefer. So it's really important that we have the evidence behind why we're making the decisions that we're making, why we're prioritising certain types of defect, why we're prioritising the funding in certain areas on certain routes. There will be challenges around that. Why, particularly in highways? Obviously there are issues around the concerns around accidents and claims and people being injured. So it's always going to be why, making sure we're really clear as to what decisions we make. And consistency with other authorities. The public don't see necessarily the boundaries between ourselves and other highway authorities around us, and it's really important that we talk to them, and we do. We have a lot of engagement with them through the Midlands Service Improvement Group and through other sort of peer groups that we belong to. So we look at what they're doing and what we're doing and try and align them, try and make sure that we can manage as well as we can. Risks take a sort of a number of different forms, so just a little bit of information around that. So highway asset risks, I suppose the top one really is safety, making sure that the road is safe for the people that use it. The second one that I've highlighted is asset loss or damage. So it's the availability. It may not be dangerous if a particular bridge is getting towards the end of its life, but if there's a potential for something happening in the next 2 or 3 years to that bridge that meant we may have to go down to single lane running or something like that, it's around accessibility and availability of the network. And then reputation. We are a democratic organisation. We do need to manage that, and we need to make sure that we're providing a service that our users and the public and residents want. I had a slide on the policy framework. Everything obviously sits under the single outcome framework, and the various policies through our department, asset intervention sort of types and how it's split. Funding from obviously the medium-term financial strategy and also external funding, and right down to the operational delivery. There's a whole series, and the objectives come all the way from the top and from the single outcome framework, making sure that the highway network is managed in the best way possible. Just really talking about how we are dealing with the various different types of risks. So I talked about asset integrity risks, so the availability of it, the state of the road. We manage that with risk registers that all the different asset owners, so bridge colleagues or street lighting colleagues or carriageway colleagues, they all have risks. They all provide information to us saying, well, if we don't do this in this time scale, this might happen. And we keep records of all of those, and it helps us to prioritise our preventative work, our funding bids, our long-term aspirations for what we're going to do. And we've talked about safety risks. So safety risks we manage under levels of service. So how quickly do we get out and manage a particular defect? What items are classed as defects? And the levels of service can be either cyclic, where we go out routinely and do work, or they can be active. It's on the back of an inspection or on the back of a phone call from a member of the public or another organisation. And then we have what we've called corporate or reputational risks. These are the things where we're providing additional service as an authority. Decisions have been made at a level, whether at member level potentially, and we provide an enhanced level of service because we feel it's what the people of Leicestershire want to see and want. It doesn't necessarily have a specific safety reason, it doesn't necessarily have a specific asset integrity reason, but it's around sort of people's perception, people's comfort, people's potentially view of the environment that they live in. So the main aspects of the risk-based approach around the safety is establishment, of a maintenance hierarchy. So as you'd probably understand, there are different levels of usage of different roads, and the ones that are the most important to the travelling public, that may mean that it's the busiest, it may mean it's the one near the hospital, it may mean it's the one near the power station. Those roads and those routes that are the most important to the economy and the safety and people being able to get from A to B. Those are perhaps where we'd choose to and would need to prioritise funding. Different areas of our network that may be less used, have less economic or safety requirements, potentially we can leave those a little longer, and any defects on those have less risk. And we look to implement agreed levels of service so we can make sure that we do manage our performance, we make sure that we deliver, and that we can demonstrate that we've done what's reasonable in any kind of case of law or claim or any type of incident. Making sure that we lay out what we plan to do just gives us that sort of that baseline. Just really covering what I've just stated around network hierarchy and the different types of reasons why people use roads, locally important roads, strategic routes, etc. Sort of reviewing our network hierarchy as part of the new code of practice and part of moving towards a risk-based approach. And it takes into account, as I've just said, economy, resilience, traffic levels, accidents, all sorts of different evidence goes into that review process. Again, this slide just gives a little bit more detail around that, and happy to answer any questions or provide any further information. We obviously need to inspect our network to make sure that we know what state it's in, make sure we know when there are issues and problems. And again, the frequency that we inspect our network is dependent on the potential risk to users. So again, it's around usage, around previous accident information, around vulnerable users. Potentially it can be around the deterioration in a particular road. If a particular road or particular piece of a route is deteriorating quicker than anticipated, then we would inspect it more frequently. And also the consequences of failure. There are routes that, if they were not available, would have a sort of a severe detrimental effect to people's ability to get around and get to different places. Just what it should do. So really on the levels of service page, we've said it's all about a risk-based approach. So in practice, a risk-based approach is around looking at the types of defects or the impact that those might have and the likelihood of them occurring. So slightly more colour on this slide. Apologies, there's been an awful lot of text. It's really just trying to explain how we manage and how we deal with the risks. So down the left-hand side, you've got the impact. So just to make it sort of a little bit more real, you may have a pothole, something that everyone's familiar with. Depending on where that pothole is, on what road it is, and how big it is, you have differences in impact. And then your probability is around, if you've got 10 vehicles, 10 users using that particular route, or you've got 1,000 or 10,000, then the likelihood of it causing a problem obviously increases. And it's balancing those two things that gives us the priority when we're looking to deal with those defects. So the priority 1, priority 2 that we've got underneath, they're not specifically anything that as an authority we are doing. It's just some figures that I put in just to give an example of the different timescales. So we may choose to make one safe. It might be the inspector finds a defect and literally they stand next to it until somebody comes along and deals with it because it's that dangerous, it's that much of a problem. There may be others that we'd complete within 4 days once they've been made safe. Others can be packaged up, delivered more efficiently and delivered perhaps within a month because they don't cause, there's not a huge risk to leaving them in that state. So we're putting out an updated level of service document over the next sort of few months, and we're working with colleagues and stakeholders to put that together. And there'll be levels of service for both reactive, so potholes, tree cutting, damage signs, that type of thing, and also cyclics, that would be winter maintenance, gully emptying and those different aspects. And that will also include our enhanced services. So where we deliver services that are over and above what would be necessary as part of a risk-based approach, they'll also be included in that document. So that could be grass cutting and winter maintenance. Just really to give a few examples of the different, so reactive maintenance is where something's been damaged, it's particularly dangerous, it needs doing. So it's on the back of a phone call, an inspection, or a report by the police, potentially, those types of things. And again, some more levels of several examples around reactive maintenance. It's not always going to be that although they look particularly bad, and these are not in Leicestershire, any of them, although they look particularly bad, it may be that depending on the location, the carriageway, if it's in a lay-by as opposed to in the running lane, or if it's on a rural footpath that has very little usage as opposed to an urban footpath in a town centre, the same type of defect can be left for differing lengths of time. The sign that's covered up there, it's a speed limit sign, it's really important that people travel at suitable sort of speeds. If that was a duck warning sign, it might not be quite as urgent that we would need to deal with that. So again, it does depend on the type of sign and the location. Just a little on the progress. I believe you've already seen information on the changes to gully emptying and our recommendations. This is one of the first areas that we looked at around our cyclic maintenance. We looked at the way we did it and what the outcomes were in order to change it and make it more efficient, better, and we're looking at different frequencies that mean we can actually get more gullies emptied each year now, because we're not emptying the ones that didn't need emptying every 2 years. We've moved them to 3 years, so we're able to prioritise the ones that needed doing and changing the way we're working. Just some key milestones. It just really outlines the various different sort of presentations and updates that we've done and the activities that we've been doing and will be doing over the next several months. And also the Code of Practice adoption. We've got a position statement out now, which is in the public realm, that talks about where we are with the adoption. It was never going to be a short process, changing the whole way of working to a certain extent and changing from a very prescriptive set of guidelines to guidelines where you're much more doing a sort of a dynamic risk assessment out on site was always going to take time. So we've got information there. We will be putting an action plan and timescales out into the public realm in the next 2 or 3 weeks as well on the public website to explain to people how the changes are going to come in over the next couple of years. So really just looking forward, we will be looking at our inspection routes, looking at how frequently we inspect them, and this will allow sort of lower priority routes that maybe have more traffic now than they did, or they're not an A, B or C road, which traditionally were the ones we'd inspect more frequently. Maybe there's an unclassified road that has a really important usage. So it'll enable us to manage those and make sure that we're inspecting the routes at the higher risk. And risk-based approach will allow us better management of defects and how we deal with them with inspectors. We want to deal with the most risky. We really have to deal with the most risky. And it's just making sure that we can justify that, we can evidence it, we explain to people and help their understanding and manage their expectations. We're also looking at the information we collect about our asset, how we manage it, how we maintain it, and how we use that. I think an example would be our transport model that we've got, Leicester and Leicestershire integrated transport model. We've used that for a number of years now to provide really robust evidence, and it's been really successful at getting funding into the authority for improvements to our network, whether that be new junctions, new roads. What we want to do is collect that same evidence and put those same bid processes in to get money in for maintaining what we've already got, rather than sort of increasing our asset. Improvements will still be managed and obviously still take place, but we really need more money in to maintain our network as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. That was quite comprehensive, and we'll go now to questions. Bill.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, it's an interesting report. I'm not sure I agree with it, because I don't. It's been led because of lack of money for these things. I mean, how are we going to explain to our residents, there's 3 holes in their road, we're going to repair 2 and not the 3rd. Then turn up, repair 2 holes, then drive off and leave the 3rd. They contact us and we say, it's risk-based, that's not such a big risk. We've always been told in the past, while the men are on site, it's cheaper to do the repairs while they're there and fetch them back. So now we're changing that round now to say that it doesn't bear much risk. So to me, it's a more, because there's not enough money in the pot to do these repairs, so we're going to take a risk now. Where that risk is, I know it's going to be assessed. I know you say get a better control of what's happening. But to members of the public, if they've got a porter outside their house, they want that hole repairing. Not do 2 and leave 1, because that's going to cause another conflict. So I'm interested to see how this goes over the next 18 months or whenever we do. And of course, I'm always concerned about the gully emptying, of course, which is my pet subject, as you well know, especially this time of year when the leaves are falling and blocks our gullies, and some we're not going to do for 3 years. Interesting. But you say you've measured all these and know which ones are cause problems and which ones don't. So the proof of the pudding's in the eating. So I'm sure Mr. Payne will be getting complaints from members of the public when the flooding starts, because one big thing to stop flooding is to keep the gullies open so the water flows away, not to have them blocked so we get other problems. So I'm interested in how it goes, but I'm not at all impressed by this level of doing work. There should be enough money there put into the schemes to do it, and that's government fault, not your fault. I understand where you are. If you had enough money to do this, I'm sure you'd do it in a different way. But I understand we've just been allocated some more money on central government in the budget.
Oh yes, potholes.
For potholes. So is that going to play any difference to this way you're going to do the asset management, or is that just part and parcel of the whole budget?
I think it was Anne first, and then. But, okay, over to.
I will pass on. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Bolter. I will pass on to Anne to answer the technical questions as to how maintenance is going to be managed, but I just want to correct an erroneous perception as to what's driving this. On the 3rd page of the briefing, I think it's quite clear. This new policy will apply across the United Kingdom. It's been requested by local authorities and will give until October this year to put it in place. So what's actually driving it is the code of practice and the government directives. It's not necessarily just simply about money. I'll pass on to Anne to answer the technical questions about management of the network.
Thanks very much. Just on that first point about, very factually, and as you've recognised, we are where we are with the money, and yes, that's incredibly challenging. However, despite that, what I would say about this approach is there is hard evidence to show it's far more efficient and effective use of your money in terms of what you get back for how you invest it. So I would actually debate with you that if we had all the money in the world, which we don't, and we're not going to, you know, if we're in that ideal world, that we would do things differently. I wholeheartedly believe this is a far better way to give a higher level of service to our residents and businesses out there with a limited amount of money. And regardless of that, it's good practice in terms of efficiency. And even if we had more money, why would we not want to be as efficient as possible with it? So I would debate that point. A couple other points. You mentioned the gullies, 3 yearly. Yes, I think, if I recall, I don't think you were present for the debate. There was scrutiny debate we had on that one, the report that came to a previous scrutiny meeting. But we have allocated an additional funding for a post that part of its role will look for those ones, particularly on the 3-year cycle, at the 2-year point, to check that, you know, that is fine, we're still on course for that, we've got it right, or no, actually, we need to go in, it's beginning to fill up, and deal with that. So we have got a bit of a fail-safe mechanism. I'll come back to your point about the residents' perception. If we're going in a risk-based approach and we deal with a couple of potholes in that street but leave one further down for a future time, again, it very much is about the reality of efficiency and what we really need to treat now. If there is a higher risk and, you know, the couple of potholes and we deal with those, the one further down the road we feel we can leave to a planned programme because it doesn't represent a particular risk. We will be using our money far more effectively, and we have to deal with, as Lynn's alluded to in her presentation, the riskiest issues and defects first. And I'm absolutely sure our residents and members would want us to do that. So regardless of the fact that there is a lesser risk defect further down the road, that actually we deploy that gang and that resource to go and deal with something in the other side of that village or outside it, etc., that has a higher level of risk. So I agree it's difficult in terms of public perception, because while we're there, why don't we do that further defect down the road? But absolutely, we have to deal with the ones that are posing most risk to highway users as a matter of priority. Final point, you mentioned the budget announcement and the additional money. You're absolutely correct, and I think it's a very good question in terms of will it change our approach to the risk-based approach because we've got additional money. We're still waiting to hear what that will mean for us as Leicestershire, because it was a national announcement. It could be around about 4 to 5 million additional. However, while that is more than welcome, and we are more than happy to direct that to potholes and dealing with those, ultimately it will not change our core approach of a risk-based approach to maintenance going forward. And it isn't just, you know, changing it for 1 year. We're talking about our whole approach going forward in the medium to long term. So no, it won't actually change our approach, but it is very welcome additional money. Thank you.
Of course you can.
Stand Blake's point of view, but local authorities got in touch with the government because they're not got enough money to maintain the highways. And that was a driving force why they got in touch with the government, told the way they do it. What I was referring to regarding the potholes, I agree if one's on the other side of the village, why bother to do that one if it's not dangerous? But when you've got three holes close together in the same patch of road outside the same residence, to do two and miss the third because it doesn't meet the criteria, to me seems a waste of resources. Thank you, Chair.
Bill?
I think as the Chancellor made such a big play of this pothole money, I think the people out there will be expecting to see an improvement. So that is a challenge. That's a challenge for this and every authority to use that money wisely. Having been a customer of QuickSave now for twice in a week, it strikes me. Not QuickSave, QuickFit. Sorry, yes, QuickFit. Yes, sorry. Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes. Yes. No. I went in there and I said, well, are you getting busy? And they said they're overwhelmed with customers now. So it makes you wonder whether we should be putting some of our money into quick fit rather than into. But no, but I think that's just indicative, though, isn't it? That motorists are now suffering more punctures, and it does have an impact. If we can't fix the potholes? In fact, it does have an impact. Could I just make a positive suggestion? Could we look at the damage that is being done to our roads by heavy vehicles? I know we've all got problems with the fact that weight restrictions have been imposed on roads, but unfortunately, the weight restrictions are not totally complied with, and heavy vehicles come through at night or whenever they can, and it's never anybody's responsibility to stop them. The police haven't got the resources to stop them, the county council hasn't, and nobody else has, and so the drivers of heavy vehicles get away with it because they're on they're forced to take shortcuts because of time restraints and everything else. I'm just wondering whether if we could better enforce weight restrictions, would that reduce the damage to county roads and relieve the pressure on our budget somewhat? I mean, I don't have a quick reply. It's just a suggestion which might be just worth looking into for the future.
Okay, before I start, I think the quick fit is quite interesting, but there is a lot more cars in the road as well, as you're aware. It's crazy the amount of cars that we've got. From Melton alone, there's 3-bedroom houses with 3 to 4 cars, depending on family. So that doesn't help the infrastructure. I think I'm the first one to sort of look and analyse. Let's not beat ourselves up too much here. We do provide. I do drive the country with the business. I come back. Sometimes I can't wait to get back to the Leicester roads compared to the ones in Derbyshire, the ones in Staffordshire. So let's not beat ourselves up a little bit. We do provide a decent service, and I'm not saying that because of any political reason. I think sometimes we have to look at it honestly and say we do actually. I was in Birmingham the other day, and I could not believe how poor the roads were. I do understand your point of view, Bill. You're quite right about efficiency. But I do believe this approach may help. I don't know. We've got to look at a better way. Sometimes having money doesn't give you efficiencies. It makes you wasteful. Maybe because we've got to look at our money, we're trying to do things better with the money we've got. That's not a bad thing, I don't think. But I do feel let's not beat ourselves up, because on the whole, from everything I read and when I go to other places and either other councils, that we're quite high, we're very high up there when it comes down to the quality of service we provide our road users. The heavy duty, you're quite right, I live in Melton, it's bonkers some of the trucks coming through there. We've had a corner there that's been repaired so many times, and but unfortunately, unless we bring rules in, prevent trucks travelling at certain times, which they do in Europe, by the way, certain times of night, certain times, not allowing overtaking in certain, as you know, go to Germany, you can't overtake on dual carriageways, but they're big issues that we can feed into as a council, but they're national issues. Max, over to you.
Beg your pardon. Yeah, I understand where Mr. Bolter's coming from, because, amongst the community, we often hear, well, this is a policy invented by County Hall. They know nothing. They're sitting up there in Glenfield, scheming over computers and gulling ignorant councillors. Of course, life is not like that. So what I just wanted to say was that communication on this policy is crucial, and I don't think it's that difficult, because what councillors need, what parishes need, what borough councillors need, and any community leader needs is an explanation of a policy in simple terms. Now, for some weeks I was coming, or months probably, coming to this committee saying, can we have a clear definition of what constitutes a reportable pothole? And I think it was something between, was it 5 centimetres deep or was it 8? I've forgotten. But we need something as community leaders that a clear, concise, and can guide the public when we get perhaps sometimes very angry people saying, why hasn't my 3rd pothole been filled? Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Over to Hilary.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the presentation. It makes it so much easier to understand. I too travel the country quite frequently, and we should be quite proud when you go into neighbouring councils or even further south and things. Their roads are much worse than ours. So maybe the people that are going to Quickfit have been in Oxfordshire or Lincolnshire or something, and then not Leicestershire. No, I'd like to come back to the gullies and other sort of scheduled work. I know that as particularly gully cleaning, I know that from people in my division and talking to people, we get the information when this work's going to be done, and it is publicised to a certain extent. Let us come down to sort of my level. I'm not going to read all the legal jargons in papers saying this road's going to be closed and that road's going to be closed. Not many papers now. There are so few of them and people aren't reading them locally, especially that section. What I am wondering, when we're going into a more planned, and I'm talking about the planned works, not the emergency works that can be done, is if we could be given, as Max has indicated this slightly as well, is the councillors, the parish councils, etc., district council, be given, right, Mrs. Fryer, in November, these are the roads in your division we're going to be working on. And that comes out to me in October. I'm in that community. I've got people who said, if we know that the gully people are coming round easily, we'll go round all our neighbours and tell them to make sure the roads are clear. So it helps us to keep in touch with our residents. B, it saves the poor people coming out and saying, well, your staff, well, we didn't clean that gully because we couldn't even get near it. There's a car parked over it or something. So I think this could make it more efficient. By doing that, quite simply, we're always in communication. Parish councils are always in communication, so that if we have a bit of notice, I've got people in my division say, well, if I knew they were coming, Hilary, I'd go and tell all my neighbours to get the cars out from 8 till and a time. So it's no good coming to my road at 9 o'clock in the morning because you won't get. I can't even park outside my house. Come at 11 o'clock and the road's empty. So again, you're losing local knowledge much more effectively. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilary. Not Janice, was it? You were just pointing to something, so it was... No? Okay, that's all right. I'm just making sure. I don't want to miss you because you're looking nice in the corner there. Sorry, Jonathan. It's Jonathan.
Mine is just quick regarding the gullies. In the past, if I've got a problem with the gully, I ring up to county, to the customer care, and it is done so quickly. So there's no good sitting moaning about gullies that need repairing. If you actually get in touch with county council, they are soon cleaned. So that's really not an issue that I see. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Janice. Over to Jonathan.
It's a pleasure. Really just to support some of the comments that others have made as well about the quality of what we actually do with the money we have and the road surfaces and everything else. I live on a particular road where I happen to be the last house before it switches from Leicestershire to Nottinghamshire. And to get into Loughborough, if I turn right, then I actually go through Nottinghamshire before coming back into Leicestershire. And I have to say, literally at the border, the road quality disintegrates. And that's not just that particular road. I mean, I talk to a lot of people in Nottinghamshire, and they complain endlessly in a way that we don't in this county about the quality of their road surfaces. And I have to say, on the potholes, huge credit to our officers and teams. I managed to get one repaired for a resident within 24 hours of it being reported to me. Passed on the message straight away, and the next day I got a message from the resident, chuffed to bits, the pothole had been fixed literally that morning. So we're doing something right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I always wondered why you had a car and a tractor. So obviously the tractor is when you turn right. Yeah, okay. Is there any more questions on this? Over to you.
Yeah, I
Blake.
just wanted to briefly wrap up and thank you for the comments. Just on the money issue, the department are still working through what that means to us, as Anne's already said. And what I can say to you, we've come to council and we've come to scrutiny in the last year, and we've made around about a £5 million commitment to dealing with the potholes prior to the budget meeting last week or 2 weeks ago, and the announcement from the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So the key here is how do we use the additional money, or whether that, if you like, replaces money that we've already committed, so we can deploy that elsewhere. So we'll come to scrutiny and update you on when we know more about that area. In terms of cars, I think it's a known fact. There's about 600,000 extra vehicles on the UK roads every single year. In 2015, there's about 25 million vehicles, and that's grown by 600,000 vehicles a year. We know, because we feel it being a hub for distribution and logistics and quarries, that the heavy goods vehicles and the lorries do have a detrimental impact on our roads, which is why we make representations to get some of our road network turned into major route networks so we can access the money needed to bring them into order. But you know, it is really about maintaining our roads and keeping them to the high level that we've become accustomed to. We're not perfect by any means, but we do have pretty good quality roads, and you know, the mission is to try and maintain that quality as best we can. And in terms of the actual approach, it is complex, it is going to be challenging, you know, when we're approached by members of our community. And I do take on your point, Hilary, that the communication as to, you know, what roads we're doing, how we're improving them, what the schedule is, will be key here in, again, mitigating some of those challenges that we'll face as elected members. So we'll go back and think about how we can improve even further those communication channels.
Thank you, Blake. Anne, you want to add to that?
Sorry, just one final thing on the communications, and I think that was very helpful. Thank you for this debate. We are working hard to get more information on the Members Hub about planned works coming up in your area. However, I think a very valid point, we need to think about how we can improve that communication with the parish councils in particular. We all know how much, you know, they are willing to help and could be of help as well. I think the other thing I would ask members is please feedback. Is it working for you? Is it not? What would be easier? You know, how would it be easier? You know, in what format would the information be easier for you, etc. And you know, we will certainly look to try and do that. So we'd very much appreciate, you know, your views and your feedback on that, so we can help improve that communication flow.
Well, just add to the traffic chaos, it took me 45 minutes to go 1 mile in Melton yesterday. Don't know what happened, but it was awful. So I turned around and missed a meeting because of it. So there you go. We'll go on to the next agenda and over to the smiling ever Ian, who always looks cheerful. And we're going to talk about the situation regarding the funding methodology for community transport. You're all aware that community transport and buses has been a major part of this committee, and it's a very important issue for a lot of people out there. So now we're going to discuss some of the funding and costs and how we're going with it. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. This is an update report back to members asked for by yourselves to keep considering the consequences of the reductions in funding that were brought in starting 3 years ago almost now with community transport provision. Community transport is currently provided by 13 operators now around Leicestershire, and in December 2015 a reduction of funding and a new methodology for how that money was given out starting in 2016 financial year. Members, as I say, asked for a report to come back as you wanted to be conscious of the impact that may have had. Part of the changes we were trying to bring in as well were trying to make the community transport providers give more information with regards to the money we were giving, and to help them be more efficient also in how they were using that money. The current grant in 18-19 currently sits at £512,000 and is similar to the last 3 years. Appendix in the report gives details of the grants given out, the passenger numbers and the cost per passenger head, which is really good to start having that information now, as we can work in more detail with the different providers, understanding why their costs may vary so greatly, how they can be more efficient, and also the management costs that they're charging, because those vary considerably across each provider. The operators have continued to report back to us with issues that they face. Not surprisingly, they have a shortage of volunteer drivers. They have concerns about the CCG element of the funding they're provided, which comes direct to provide for health visits. Financial pressures, I think we all understand those. And of course, they all have a different view about how the money should be given out, depending on whether they're urban or rural in nature, and the share they should get. They also say they suffer from a lack of recognition for the service they provide, but I do know as officers, and I'm sure members, I've had feedback, they provide an invaluable service, mostly by volunteers, getting many thousands of people who couldn't use conventional transport to journeys, to things that are really important. In conclusion, in the report, as it says there, I'm pleased to say there has not really been a negative impact at all on the reduction in funding. We're seeing greater efficiency across most of the service areas of what they're doing. We've had a 1% increase in passenger numbers for the last couple of years. And we will continue. I think it's important to work with the community transport providers, providing them with help and guidance so they can be more efficient, make better use of their resources, and also play that vital part they do in providing those transport services for our communities. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Ian, thank you very much for that and very clear report. Can I ask a question? I mean, the table actually is very interesting, and this policy question, I guess, also for Blake. Really, it's about how we actually judge the best way of actually being able to provide some of this service. So, for instance, some of the travel journeys or cost per travel journey are obviously quite similar, sort of around about £3 or £4, and obviously the way they're provided actually helps to make that cost actually quite competitive. And then we've got a couple that are quite a bit higher, one at £10.30 per passenger journey. And I at that point, it feels as if almost a sort of commercial taxi type service probably might be more economic. And I just wonder whether we actually at some point do consider whether actually subsidising vouchers for taxis or something similar locally in those particular areas is an alternative to actually subsidising a volunteer service.
Yes, and part of the drive to get...
apologies for that. The rules are that's a bottle of whiskey for everybody here today from the person who left the phone on. Thank you, my old mate. You can go to Quick Save or wherever it was.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just wondering what flavour whiskey I want. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, part of the changes that we made was to get that better information and understanding the costs, and you're exactly right. And the one you pointed out there in Shepshed is one of the areas that we have had to work quite considerably with the providers. They have had a number of difficulties. They have had change in the way they've been doing things. And you're right, with that information, especially under the now coming in passenger transport policy, we will have to really consider how we best use our money. Now, one of the comments we got back through the consultation for that was the community transport providers and their role in that. That will emerge over the next 12 to 18 months, I'm sure. But you're correct. We will need to keep working with them. In the report, it says about some of the data we've been getting from them has not been good, and we are better working with them on that. I think if we ever made the decisions, and as you will see at the bottom, the Sheer Ram scheme, we no longer fund that as it no longer qualifies. I think we should all be held to account for how we spend our money. So if members continue to want us to bring back a report here, as they've asked us to do annually on passenger transport subsidies that we're doing and how we hold the bus companies to account, we could encompass that as part of that report, and then members could debate on where we're most usefully spending our money in the gaps we are. Thank you.
Anne?
Just to add what Ian said, absolutely correct. You know, I think I would just say we are on a journey, excuse the pun, with this. Particularly that higher one you've highlighted there. There were specific issues there. They've kind of reinvented themselves, but are in the early phase of that. Equally, across the board, we have had many questions from the operators about what exactly constitutes management costs, because we've given them targets to get down to a certain level, a maximum level of managerial costs, and we're still evolving that. So I think, to be fair across the board, we aren't where we think we could be with all the operators in terms of the efficiency. But yes, I would say in a year or two's time, we need to seriously be looking, is it still value for money? Is it the best way to provide that service? But I don't think we're there quite yet.
Bill?
Yes, Chair. It says in the appendix on page 45 about Obi and Wixton, the figures are wrong. Have we got the right figures, or is that work pending? The other thing I would like to know is, do each of the units charge the same price per mile to the customers, or do they charge different rates to the customers? That would affect the amount of cost per journey.
I think Ian can answer that, yeah.
Yes, to the best of my knowledge, and if I'm incorrect, I will correct it later. Regarding Obi and Wigston, they fed back that they hadn't included some of their CCG journeys. That's why they expected to go up considerably. So that's where their error was, and I say that's what we're helping them through, get better, them understanding their full journeys. So that was the Obi and Wigston. The community transport operators work together on their cost to try and set the same rates. It's one of the things we've encouraged so they can learn best practice from each other. As far as I'm aware, they all have slightly different rates, but they are trying to always meet their own costs, which brings them out at the same sort of level. So I think the journey costs are about the same, but that is something we will have better information on for members at the next report.
Just a quick one. I mean, I think this is the third, or certainly the second or third report we've had on this, and I think there's some really excellent work being done in a very sensitive area, because we are, after all, dealing with voluntary organisations, and there's a lot of volunteers that go into these things. I think it's important to not just differentiate between what we're talking about here, which is community transport, and the public transport matters we've been dealing with earlier on the committee, but also and I'm sure that officers will be doing this, see where any overlaps might occur, and efficiencies, even more efficiencies, can be made. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Any other questions? James?
Thank you, Chair. Just really a quick comment, first of all, on, they all do, I'm sure, a fantastic job for the community. Certainly the one I know best is Syston Volunteers, who are well known and loved in my area, and indeed the whole of the South Charnwood area. My quick question really is just sort of trying to cement my understanding of how this relates to sort of the subject we talked at the last meeting about, which was potentially the, I'm going to call it dial-a-ride. I know it's not the technical name for it, but the dial-a-ride situation. These at the moment, would this just be for certain people with needs, specific needs, or would this be potentially envisaged down the line to be for anyone and everyone that would require the dial-a-ride service? If so,
James, can I just say dial-a-ride direct response transport?
Direct response, yeah,
demand. I think it's important as a committee we use the term because so we don't confuse people.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
So can we just confirm that again? It's
the
demand
response
transport.
Transport.
Thank you.
Yes.
I get it wrong sometimes.
Yes. You sort of see where I'm going with the question there. Do you want me to expand on that? What's the relationship between the two?
Chairman, I'll pass on to the officers just to answer that specific point. But just for my part, this report's come to us because a couple of years ago the council changed the funding towards the community voluntary community passenger transport services that are provided out there by the volunteers. I think they're a great example of voluntary work in action. And considering what we've just recently done with the passenger transport policy, I really do believe that this is a part of maybe the mitigation in response to the reduction in commercial services around the county, and they do a great job. Obviously, it's incumbent on us, because we are spending public money, to make sure that that money is being spent in the most efficient way, hence the report before us. But I think there's an opportunity here to see whether the community voluntary transport services can actually mitigate, especially in the rural parts of the county, the loss of commercial services. And I've had a couple of representations from around the county, and they welcome the opportunity. There'll need to be some changes in the rules, as I understand it, to enable that to happen, because clearly, if they start encroaching on commercial operations, they're no longer eligible for grant funding as it stands. But there's certainly a lot of merit in. I'd like to thank the community operators for what they do. Just in response to the dial-a-ride, I think dial-a-ride is a term that the community operators use themselves. We call it demand responsive. Some of the commercial operators have called it click and drive or something, a Reaver click. We've all got different terminology, but it's interesting that actually the community operators for some time have been operating what we consider to be a demand responsive service themselves, and a lot of them pride themselves on that level of service, and they talk about within Appendix B how they can tailor their services for their end users through this dial-a-ride system. So it's really interesting and something I think we can perhaps learn from in our policy making ourselves.
I guess from my point of view, and all of us have been there, that communication, we've talked about it quite a bit through this committee, that with our residents having so many different terminology, I just think from our point of view, we use one term, get it right, so at least our own residents know what we're talking about. And I think we're doing that to a certain degree, but I do know these other, I've heard them called different things, and I think it's quite confusing. I just think, to finish it all off, if we do look at, I'm sure I'm reading it right, 2016-17, there was 120,774. Is that correct? Yes. At £4.24, that increased to 123,521 at a cost of £4.12. Is that correct? Well, I think that's going in the right way, don't you? And I think we should congratulate everybody involved. If we can use money better, get more journeys, that's a very, very healthy way to look at things. So I think that's well done to everybody. Okay. Okay, we'll finish. No more questions. We'll go on to the next agenda item, the annual report, and that will be introduced by Anne again. I'm sure after these days, Anne, you must go home and gargle and have a sore throat. Okay, I'll leave it to you, Anne. Over to you.
Thank you very much. This is, while committee members are very familiar with our quarterly performance report, just to emphasise, this is our annual one, so it's looking back at financial year 17-18 in the most part. Some of the indicators are a year or two behind in our arrears, depending on where we get the data from or the data source. However, in the bulk, it is the annual report for our performance indicators against the department. Overall, 10 indicators have improved over the year in comparison with the previous year, 2016-17. 6 have declined and 5 have remained the same. For 4 of those indicators are in the top quartile. That's when compared to other comparator authorities, i.e. county councils. And 2 of them are in the bottom quartile. I'll just propose to go to Appendix A, the dashboard, and just pick out a few things and talk you through those. And then, obviously, I'm more than happy to answer questions on any specifics you have. For the first 2 indicators on that Appendix A, and this is the new format we introduced last time, which relates our indicators back to the corporate strategic objectives of strong economy, keeping people safe, etc. Those first 2 indicators are very much, as you've seen before, there is little change in terms of the patterns of those. The third one has seen the percentage of business citing concerns about traffic congestion has seen an improvement. So the 28% in 2017 is obviously an improvement on the 37% of businesses citing concerns about traffic congestion in 2015 in the earlier study that was carried out. So, you know, moving in the right direction from that one, from that indication and view from the business community. The next one about total CO2 emissions in local authority area originating from road transport. This data comes from central government, and as you can see is a year behind most data we're talking about in this report. And we are actually, we have actually seen a slight decline in performance from 1,820, that'll be tonnes of CO2 emissions, to 1,878. Fundamentally, however, you know, some of the reasons behind that will be growing population, growing traffic economy, growing traffic volumes, as well as economic growth. There is a direct relationship between economic growth and traffic volumes. So the fact that we are seeing the upturn and, you know, the economy is beginning to grow again, we'll see more traffic, which ultimately will see more emissions in CO2. Obviously, there's another factor in terms of better technology, reducing emissions that will come into play in that one. However, you know, in terms of those statistics, we're still not in a position where it's going in the right direction for us, unfortunately. No change in the next one in terms of percentage of classified network where structural maintenance should be considered, and that stands at 2%, much lower than the target, and obviously the lower the figure the better, the target of 5 to 6% in that, and there's been no change over the last year. I'll just fleetingly say that the next one, percentage of network gritted, again, we've achieved that, our target of gritting 45% of our network when we go out. I would just highlight, though, the context of that, however, is obviously we had a very tough winter last year, much tougher than we normally have, and we've still managed to maintain that. So, you know, while it is stayed static, I would say that, you know, we have done well to maintain that. In terms of satisfaction with condition of highways, while that has gone down just marginally on the previous year, at that time were still the top ranked authority across our comparators, and 11th across all of the 121 authorities that take part in that NHT survey. So, you know, still very much therefore reflects we're in the top quartile for that one. The satisfaction with cycle routes and cycle lanes, we've seen a slight increase in that, and we're in the top quartile, which is positive, obviously, despite we're not quite hitting our target yet. So still, you know, we need to keep focusing on that, more work to do. Bus journeys, that one has got, you'll see that big red there in front of you, unfortunately, on the fourth quartile. And we have seen a decline in the bus passenger journeys that have happened within the county from 13.78 million to 13.22 million. Very much reflects the national picture of decline in patronage. Unfortunately, in some areas are worse than others. What I would say, in some of our quarterly reports, you might recall that we were reporting that figure was at 13 million. So overall for the year, you know, it has gone up to 13.2. But yes, doesn't hit the target, unfortunately, and has declined on previous year. In terms of road casualties, keeping people safe, the strategic objective, top quartile there. Yes, we're meeting our target, and yes, it's been an improvement on the previous year. However, as we have said at each quarterly report to you, we would caveat that with the fact that the police have changed their operation in terms of how they record accidents. So we're working with them to try and understand the impact that that may have. So we always caveat that one. While on the face of it, it looks really, really good, we do think some of that will be down to how the data is now being captured. The next one, while we're still in the top quartile for killed and seriously injured on our roads, unfortunately, we're not meeting our target, and we're not on a trajectory to meet that target. 213 when the target's 178. What we'll say, however, that was for last year, and just actually checking up on the latest 12-month rolling average, which is how we work on these. At the moment, our latest one to the end of July, we're at 208, so things are improving at the moment, despite the fact we haven't met the target for last financial year. Just moving on over the page, you'll see that red at the top, household waste per household, kilograms per household. You're aware we're not meeting, we have met the target in that. However, we're still in the 4th quartile. But what that's reflecting is there's actually a very narrow banding. So there's a lot of authorities within very similar figures, which we unfortunately are falling into the bottom quartile of that. And I think the other thing to see is, again, waste tends to, in general, be related to level of affluence. We are a relatively affluent county, therefore we tend to have slightly higher levels of household waste. The next one, percentage of household waste sent for reuse, recycling, composting, that hasn't met its target and is declining. I'm not going to go into any detail. We had a report in the last Scrutiny Committee on that, and we had a good debate around it. Similar to the next one, again, we haven't met the target on waste landfill percentage sent to landfill. And it has decreased from the previous year, but we have covered before with you the reasons why that actually has come into play. The next one I'll look at is that 2 down, percentage waste from LCC non-operational sites. This is one that we have frequently discussed with you at scrutiny meetings, and again you'll see we're not meeting our target of 70%. That's actually by 2030, that target. But you'll see in the commentary there, they're saying it says we've adopted a more intelligent approach in line with our, under a new environment strategy. What we have done is we've broken that down, and it will be reported through our environment strategy. The target for County Hall is 80%, and the target for non-County Hall sites is 60%. We are doing more work for those sites that are open to the public, etc., where we've got slightly less control on what happens, to try and bring them up, but acknowledging that we need to have, intelligent targets for them and stretching targets for County Hall as well, where we have been more successful. The next one, CO2 emissions from LCC operations. You'll see we've got a significant improvement in performance there, above the target, down to our own lighting, heating, the biomass boiler, solar panels, LED, whole load of initiatives there coming into play. So it's a real significant improvement in performance there. Carbon emissions from LCC buildings, again similar to the above, and some of those factors I've just explained will come into, have actually, been the determinants of that improvement. Just moving further down there to the second last one, amount of renewable energy generated, percentage of consumption. We are meeting our target there. You'll see we're above it, and we have had an improvement in the previous year. You're aware that laterally in Cabinet a few months ago we signed up to the UK 100 pledge of 100% renewables by 2050. So obviously we're on a journey. There's a lot of years yet, but it's like you blink and they're all round. But we've got a long way to go on that one as well. Final one, that CO2 emissions per capita, just to remind you that covers all domestic, industrial and transport emissions, so a hugely all-encompassing one. We have seen an improvement on that, and we will be working on a target under the environment strategy, but you'll appreciate there's an awful lot in there that we as a local authority do not have any direct control over. Final thing I'll point out to you is Appendix B. This is a draft Environment and Transport section of the County Council's annual report. It is draft because it was the version at the time of publishing these scrutiny papers. It has moved on, so there's a few things from our perspective that have changed. Not fundamentally, but there's a few, clarifications, etc. More than happy to answer any questions on that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, and very clear. Over to Janice.
Mine is regarding page 53, keeping people safe, bottom of the page. I'm concerned at the underreporting of accidents by the police. So we're not getting a true picture of accident black spots. If there's no casualties, are these not reported by the police? I've witnessed at a very, very busy area 3 considerable looking serious accidents. But then if there was no casualties, would they not be reported? Because they wouldn't. So this is a real concern to me, because you've got accident black spots that we don't really know about if the police are not reporting them. So could I have any more information on that, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Just to answer a little bit, because I did that with Ian, we've got exactly the same situation. It's called Lag Lane, would you believe, and it's on the road going to Grantham, and there was some incidents and perceived dangerous, and it is not easy. It is I think you've been seeing the road, haven't you, Ian, yourself? Yeah, it's not a good road, but unfortunately, if there's an incident and an accident and there's nobody injured, and it's not or injured, it could be even injured, not reported, then it's not reported. If it's perception that it's dangerous, unless there is actually death over a period of time, the actual policy is we're not going to do anything about it. And I think that's quite the situation. Is that correct? Can you add that, Ian?
Yes, thank you, Chair. A few comments back to what you're saying. First of all, with the police changing in systems, throughout the country a number of new systems are being brought in, and the methodology that the police actually operate themselves of not attending slight type accidents where people are injured but self-reporting by individuals has led to some of those numbers. We have actually asked, and as members will be aware, we bring an annual report on casualty reduction to this committee every year, and the police have agreed they will come along and discuss with members the changes that have been made and the concerns that members have had here. So we've arranged for that to happen, which will be in spring next year. Regarding the reporting of collision-only accidents and injury accidents, as you can imagine, whilst there are, and it's hypothetical, 10 to 15 collision accidents that we all see that could indicate issues, the injury accidents, of course, the ones we're most concerned with dealing, and if we're spending very limited resources on solving problems, it should be those where people are being hurt, not just where they're making insurance claims. I do understand, as you can imagine, having worked in this area for quite a few years, the presence of collisions but no injuries can point to there is another problem, but of course we have to deal with the injury ones first. And as I saw some of the members saying, we have a target for only nearly 200 people being killed or seriously injured. The killed is a small part of that. Actually, we have very safe roads, but we've still got problems with people, and we still need to concentrate in those areas. But I do fully understand the fender-only type accidents can look very disturbing for members of the public, but actually it's the ones where we've got medical issues that are being reported that we have to deal with first.
You can, Janice.
The road that I was talking about is the Desford Crossroads. And I have seen a buzz in someone's front garden, and I've seen, since Christmas, 2 quite serious-looking accidents, so I don't know whether anyone was injured in them. But I know that this council have been trying to get funding to alter the road there. So if we had the true figures of the accidents, that may make it better that it would be forthcoming to have the road altered. Thank you,
Ian?
Chairman.
Yes, 2 things really. One, another government budget announcements from a couple of weeks ago was for a pot of £150 million for improving junctions around hopefully the country. We are waiting to see the details then, and then we will go for the money for Desford Crossroads again, because we want to get that one done. Obviously, in comparison, if we were using those numbers, if everyone who was competing for funding for every junction, if we were looking at our junctions and including the collision only, I'm sure the other junctions that people want to do as well would also include the collision only, and we'd be at the same place. So it's almost a like-for-like comparison on the evidence that we're trying to get. The injury one is what everyone in this country works on at the moment. That gives the casualty reduction and the costing. So it is a fair playing field at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Go on then, Janice.
It's regarding the Desford Crossroad. It's not only just the accidents I've witnessed, there's also congestion of traffic in that area. And I know that I've kindly met and discussed these issues and with the ward councillor as well. So it is quite a big issue. Thank you.
Can I just add to that? I think, you know, and particularly in that Desford Crossroads scenario, I think one of the challenges being, you know, where we prioritise on the basis of injury, accidents, etc., we have got relatively small budgets. What we need to do at Desford Crossroads is, you know, quite a significant scheme. And unfortunately, the funding streams that are available from government, in the large part, and the vast majority at the moment, the things that tick the box in order to secure that funding are delivery of houses and jobs. Accidents and congestion, unfortunately, while we all know it's stuff that we have to deal with, are not the things that tick the boxes to secure the millions from government that we need to deliver some of these schemes. Is just where we're at in this day and age. So it's an ongoing challenge. So something like, you know, as Ian said, the budget announcements of specific funding for junctions could be a real opportunity for us here, because we haven't had one like that for a while.
Just quite interesting, Janice, there's, I don't know which country it was, but they decided to take all markings away, all traffic lights, all lines, and there wasn't any accidents. Interesting, isn't it? Dan, over to you.
Chairman, I'm concerned with it's 54, sheet 54, the CO2 emissions that are low, because CO2 emissions are growing everywhere. There's 40,000 deaths a year related to lung disease, and smoking's dropping down, thank goodness, but it's the result of cars and lorries. And we're saying low, and travelling around the county as I do, I just can't contemplate that. The biggest problem is old vehicles, and you see so many old vehicles on the road. They're not all big brand spanking new with all the latest technology on. The polluters are the really old vehicles, and they're causing harm, and particularly where they're close to schools, because schools are mainly along roads. You know, I think of Ibstock and the traffic along the A47. I mean, it's lorry after lorry. I'm not referring to the recent road problems we had where we closed roads, and that was like a motorway up and down there with lorries. But it is a concern, and I just don't understand this low when it's absolutely increasing across the country everywhere. On 54.
Which one?
Corporate enabler.
Which one? They're all.
Sorry, it's. Oh, right, yes. I'd marked that as well. Sorry. Yes.
So can we have some clarification, you, Anne? Over to you, Blake.
Whilst the officers work out what polarity means and put in context what low actually is in the report, just a general comment from me. We've got a really good story to tell, particularly on emissions from LCC buildings, emissions from LCC operations, which is reduced by 34.2% this year. I mean, it's quite remarkable that. We've still got a journey to go on, but we're absolutely conscious about our environmental obligations and how we can get greener as an authority and use our influence and enable Leicestershire as a whole to become greener. There's a massive journey. It's something that was discussed at the Scrutiny planning workshop led by the chairman, Alan, a couple of weeks ago, actually. We've set up the new Environment Strategy Board, so there are a number of actions that will cut across the whole of the authority that really do need to be exploited. It's going to take some time. In terms of the interpretation of low in context of this matrix, I'll pass over to Nicola to answer that.
Can I just say welcome, Nicola? Nice to see you in the corner there. Hello.
If I could just clarify with the polarity column, where we put high and low, that tells us how to interpret the data in terms of if it's low, it's good performance, or if the data is high, it's good performance. So, for example, with CO2 emissions per capita in the local area, the lower that data, the lower that number, it shows us better performance. And it has actually declined, so it has improved in performance, for example, for that one, but it is in a third quartile. So we know when we're comparing to other councils that we're not actually exactly on average for that. We're lower than average.
So, if I could, Chair.
That's right, Dan.
So, I'm talking of CO2 emissions, local authority area originating from road transport. So that was my comment, road transport. Sorry if I created confusion.
Yeah, sorry. So just to confirm what Nicola said there, on that particular one, where it says low, it means the lower the figure, the better. Where we are, we're in the second quartile in terms of performance. We haven't, you know, the target there is less than 1,797. As you'll see, we haven't met that. We're at 1,872.
Yeah.
So the low doesn't refer to actually, you know, that's good performance or anything. It's about actually the lower the number, the better. And just as I said earlier, in terms of that particular one, CO2 emissions, you know, factors playing into that are population growth. We're seeing that happening. Economy coming back up. You've got more movement. You know, we've got, look at us here in Leicestershire. We have a logistics industry, use us as a huge base because we've got really good access, etc. So that's more HGV movements, etc. So they're coming into play in those ones. We obviously try and do schemes and initiatives to help alleviate that. However, the bottom line of a growing economy does mean more movement.
Yeah,
the challenge
exactly.
for us and government and industry is actually how do we make that movement less polluting, less emissions? How do we move that on? And a lot of that will come through technology, or some of that will come through technology, because our role as a highway authority, we certainly can't ban movements and stop that, and we don't want to see, you know, a decline in economics situation or anything like that. How can we still support the economy but see a reduction in some of those negative impacts of the movement that economic growth means?
Yeah. Could I just, Chairman?
Just 2 seconds, Dan.
May I just make one comment? Dan's point is absolutely spot on. I mean, with my other hat on, having sat on the LGA Transport Board and then as the lead member here being invited to Nottingham, for instance, to discuss automation and vehicle automation, one of the topics that was discussed was the most heavily polluting vehicles are lorries. You're absolutely spot on, buses and lorries, and you can see that through the 11 air quality hotspots within Leicestershire. You know, they are routes where a lot of HGV traffic uses. I mean, the government's legislated, haven't they, to ban the combustion petrol engine for cars, but I think the haulage industry are about 10 or 15 years behind, and the government, as far as I'm aware, haven't indicated that those same rules will apply to that industry for the reasons Anne's just said about not, you know, having a detrimental impact on the economy. But we do, I think, as a country, need to wake up to this challenge, because I think we all have an obligation to leave this earth in a better place than what we found it. And at the moment, that poses a really significant challenge, not only to Leicestershire and this authority, but to the country as a whole and the world, indeed.
Dan?
Yeah. It really is the old vehicles that are really old, that are the massive polluters. The modern trucks on the road have got better technology and they're nowhere near the level of pollution that the old. Now, I don't know whether we approach government and talk about it, because we've got quite a bit of growth in industry, and we've got areas that are specifically as hubs where you've got transport moving from that area, just in time, the big warehousing that we seem to be seeing growing everywhere. So, you know, we ought to look at a formula or a programme of how we could approach, whether it's government, how do we talk to people to try and create something moving to let people be aware that it's going to be bad for people's health, and we're trying to improve everybody's health in every way, and this is just happening, and it's children and people just walking along streets today are going to end up with some element of pollution. And we've got to play our part as a person who's involved in road networks. We're not responsible for the trucks, but we've got a moral responsibility to look after the people we represent. And so we've got to try and find a dialogue. How do we communicate with these people? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Dan. I think we don't disagree with that. It's a massive problem throughout the country, mainly the economic issue, because truckers will tell you that the cost the cost of transporting goods and the cost of fuel. And I think it wasn't so long ago, we were discounted to use diesel, and discovered that was wrong. So, we do get a 50 miles a gallon more. It's at times that diesel, yet petrol's proved to be cleaner. And we'll move on to the next question. Over to Bill.
Thank you. Several questions, actually, unfortunately.
Just 2 seconds, Bill. I've got a few more. You're in the list, so I haven't forgotten you.
We talked at the briefing meeting about air quality. There'll be a report coming about air quality at a future meeting, so that's important. It's one of my pet subjects, as you know. A bit disappointed on page 66 about waste disposal. We mentioned that this morning. There's only a very small amount on that, and I'm sure that Joanne will enlarge on that in a few minutes' time. Page 61, the average speed cameras we installed. There was talk at the time about the government giving us some of the money back for those. I don't know what the update on that is, but last I heard, we got nothing back from the government. So that's another thing. The leader did say he was pressing the government for money back for those when he installed them. The other thing I'm concerned about is usually about the environment, as you all know. I think we ought to know how much money we spend each year on landfill tax as a figure. That could be nicely reported, so we can keep an eye on that, because it's getting quite a lot of money. So that then turns around to the plastic recycling, which are now sending to landfill. What effect is that having on the landfill tax? They say it's not cost effective to recycle it, but it might be might be cheaper to recycle it than put it into landfill. But until we get the figures, we don't know that. And the other one, of course, is we were told that the county council's gone to this off-white paper, better for the environment. If that's the case, why all the paper has been printed for our committee on the bright white paper, which is bad for the environment. So perhaps somebody might like to answer that one. You can't have it both ways, folks. Let's have it right. If we're talking about the environment, as a county council, we'll be concerned about the environment. Don't be on top of the agenda for us. It's going to affect us and our future generations. We're just playing lip service to it. We need to get involved and do something about the environment. Met this morning in this nice room. What's the first thing we do? We put the lights on. That counts. Why? Why are the lights on this morning? It's not dark yet. We're in the middle of the day. The lights are on. I don't know whether it's this high-tech movements we have now about in County Hall, but, they shouldn't be on, in my opinion. Officers are in the dark, that's normal. It's usually, it's usually members who are in the dark. But, and as a parting shot, just to make my day, Chair, and I'd love to hear Blake's comment about page 59. Just make my day, Blake. Page 59, when we're talking about town centre traffic, just make my day to say that you're not considering charging for on-street parking in market towns. Just make my day.
Are you ready, Blake, for that one?
Before I pass on to Joe to answer the environmental points that have been raised, can I share Bill's passion about the environment. We all do, and we are trying to make it front and centre of what we do, hence the environment strategy that we brought forward. We're waiting for the waste and resources policy to come forward as well. I think, like I've just said to Dan, we've got a positive story to tell, especially in our CO2 emissions this year from the LCC operations. There's a huge amount of work to do. We're not going to, save the planet here from Leicestershire County Council on our own, but we are trying our best to put the maximum amount of resource and attention and time into coming up with strategies that can be delivered and make a real difference out in Leicestershire and beyond. With the plastics, Mr. Bolter refers to plastics generically. He's quite right. Rigid plastics at the moment aren't being recycled, and Joe may touch upon that, but it's not the case that we don't recycle plastics. We do. It's a certain type of plastic that for commercial reasons, for market reasons, that isn't being, and they're rigid plastics, and Joe will expand on that. Average speed cameras, the implementation of these speed cameras have gone down pretty well within communities. Motorists don't particularly like it, naturally, but they have been welcomed by communities. But we're in the same position. There's been correspondence between the Treasury Department and DFT and this council. So far, we don't believe we've made any progress in getting them to change the rules to allow us to keep the money so we can recover the capital cost and therefore develop the scheme further. So we'll have to consider at the end of the year where that takes us. But we're still, encouraging our MPs to fight our corner in this respect. I know the MPs welcome the scheme too, and we'll see where it takes us. It's a campaign, but obviously the government have a certain position, and they understand better than I or perhaps the Leicestershire County Council what's possible from their end, but we're trying. That's all I can say. In terms of your final point, town centre traffic, no, we made an announcement that we explored this. We looked at all the options. We're still going to deliver a programme to see how we can improve traffic throughout our market towns, what tools we've got available to do that, and look at the lining and the signing and the general on-street parking provision to see what options are available to us to try and alleviate some of the congestion issues in the market towns. But we have no plans to introduce charging within our market towns. Okay.
Just to be aware, we have to be a little bit careful, particularly the market towns, of we call it signage pollution. We get that many signs, it can actually spoil the environment. We have this thought process, sign for everything. And again, I think we mentioned it at the briefing this morning. If we constantly go on and promote something constantly, people become immune, stop listening. And I do think we have to be very careful about too much signage, because some places they go to, it's terrible. So we have to be aware of that. Anne, anything to respond to? I think Blake answered that. Are you okay with that, Bill? Jonathan?
Through you, Chair. Do you want me just to come back on Councillor Walters? Thank you. I'm over here in the dark. Through you, I think I can only apologise. Page 66, I just reiterate, it's not very helpful. I think the fact that we've added ... does imply under the statement around waste disposal. It just goes back to the Director's earlier point that it is an earlier version. I did catch up with officers this morning, and actually the latest version does have some information in for that section of the report. So I would encourage everyone, when that final report is produced, it will have the extensive information on all the areas. Apologies, it shouldn't have gone out with a draft that just doesn't have the paragraph attached to it. It's simply a version control issue. On the other point, I would be letting this committee down if I didn't know the cost of landfill tax. I absolutely do, and in terms of the MTFS and the budget planning cycles that we have, obviously we produce all of those financial reports that break down the cost. But just for information for the committee, landfill tax is a substantial cost for this authority, running into the millions. I mean, the cost per tonne for landfill is £88.95 this year. If you think that the average cost of a tonne of waste to dispose of it is just over £105, that shows how much the tax impact is on that route for disposal. It costs us, I think, over 16, 17 million of the amount we pay on disposal. It's a huge proportion of our costs. In terms of, and I also know what that escalator will be for the next 2 years. In the recent budget, they announced what that will be. So for the next year and the year after, there will be an escalation on that cost. So we have to plan for that.
Could we then have the details of the cost? I think for scrutiny it'd be quite useful. I don't think the members of the committee would disagree with that. It'd be just nice to see, so we can relate it to the contingencies and what we're doing. Can we have that available?
I'm just conscious, I'm not sure that you don't get, I can have a look at what the budget report for the MTFS, which shows what our budgets are, will break down.
Does it isolate landfill? Does it isolate it? I don't remember. Could you check?
I can certainly, at the point that financial report comes back through you, Chair, is articulate what percentage of that budget line for landfill is.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
And the other point on rigid plastics, I did confirm at the last committee meeting that yes, the rigid plastics, which we do encourage people to segregate at our recycling house or waste sites, but is not currently being recycled. We had a meeting with the portfolio holder and Blake recently, and we've acknowledged that there is a reason why we do that. We have to react to market change. So we have to have a product ready to offer to suppliers to sample to see if they're willing to take that type of material. And when I say that type of material, I don't mean sort of Tupperware tubs, the things that we absolutely still do recycle with the district colleagues through the curbside recycling, and plastic bottles, they still get recycled at our site. I mean things like plastic furniture, coat hangers, pots, garden pots, plastic pots, that sort of thing. The short issue, end of the wedge, is there is no market for it at the minute. We went out for market engagement and had no engagement from the market at all in trying to find a solution to that. And I am open with this committee that we cannot afford to recycle that material at any cost. So if we say that on average disposal is £100, £110 a tonne, it is costing substantially more, and I can't get the market to engage with me to take it. So what we have agreed is to be more transparent with members of the public. We will probably scale back that option at the sites, but we will retain it at 3 or 4 strategic locations so that we can still engage with the market, react if there's a market, and send them a product. Because what we don't want to do is switch physical signs on and off at the sites, which is the point about sign blindness. It confuses people when they're using the facility. So we are looking to redress that, but it's just in light of the conversation we had the last time. As for paper, we do use a lot of paper through the organisation. We map that, we monitor it with colleagues in central print, and we do buy a lot of paper that has different levels of recycled content. Arguably, the colour is still questionable. We will still find that the vast majority of the paper we're purchasing has some environmental benefit, whether it's got the bleaching affecting it. They will be looking at that as well as a cost benefit environmentally. But I will feed it back to colleagues in central print to ask why papers are or are not on the same paper as in the printers.
Thank you. Over to you, Bill.
John is quite right. However, some of the chemicals used to make the paper white cause environmental problems. If this not this country, in other countries, we need to be involved about the whole planet, not just very narrow. Yes, I think it's important that we know exactly what plastics are going to landfill and which are being recycled. We use the term hard plastics, but people got different ideas what hard plastics are. If you say black plastic, that's fine, we know exactly what that is. But what about the blue plastics and the brown plastics? Where do you draw the line on those? A lot of the food contains not just black plastic, but blue plastic. Where does that one fall? What do you do with that? So, don't want to confuse members of the public about what they can and can't recycle. To make it easier, should recycle. Residents should put all plastics out for recycling, and somebody else should sort out what can and can't be done. Once you start picking and choosing, it reduces the amount, and people just lose the will to live on that and just say, "I'll put it all in landfill then." So it's important we get that message out, and we as members should know what can and can't do, because we're the ones who get asked the question. So our forums are often being asked that. What happens to the plastic? Does it all get recycled? Well, no, it doesn't. What happens to it? Well, some goes to landfill. Well, what plastics go for landfill? And we're stuck there thinking, we don't honestly know. We just say hard plastic, and that covers a multitude of things. So, over to Joanne.
Well, Joe, it's okay, Joe. There is again, I don't know where you've all checked it. I think we need to move on in a minute, but there is. Have you been to where they had the display showing you? And I think that changed my mind, because there was, I had a certain, what I thought was, I was doing the right thing, I wasn't. So I think for this committee, if you haven't done that, I think you need to go along to the department. I do encourage you to find out, because it has changed. It has changed. Some of the things I was putting for recycling, no, that's not recycled anymore. It is a flowing situation with recycling, sadly, and it can make it confusing. We need to move on quick, as we've got other questions. Will be here. Is it you need to say?
Just on the plastics, look, I think therein lies the problem we have. We're a relatively small local authority in the grand scheme of things, and the Chancellor in his budget did mention about we're brought in the threat of legislating to deal with some of the producer responsibilities when it comes to plastics. I'm not an expert in this area, but the tours I've done of case pack, etc., I've learnt that there are 7 types of plastic at the moment. Some of them are recyclable, some of them aren't, some of them there's a market for. Extremely complex for us to put a system in to be able to cater for all those needs. And when it comes to communicating what we do, we are in danger of confusing Leicestershire residents with putting information out that may change from month to month. So, there's always going to be a balance as to how we promote or communicate what we actually do. I take on point Mr. Bolter's point, and we share the same objective, which is to be as responsible with our recycling systems and do the best with them as we can within the budget envelope we've got. But it really is a national issue. It's something that the government, we need to do something about for us to continue to get best value and most efficiency out of our budgets, but also to deal with another problem, which is to reduce plastics in the environment.
No, I was. I was looking for something I'm going to send to you all, because actually there's this chap in India who's designed a process with all this plastic, and actually they're making roads, buildings out of it. They're compressing it. It was on BBC. It was fascinating. It's a bit colourful if you don't want to paint it, but it looks very interesting. So somewhere down the line, there may be a saviour. I think we go to the next person, Max. I know James is waiting, but I'm trying to do it in the order you put your hand up. Max.
On the recycling thing, I think the 3rd or 4th meeting we've discussed it, and I think when we're discussing it that much, we have an indecent interest in plastic, or there's a problem, and I think the latter, actually. But I've wanted to draw attention to part of the report, which I think paragraph, where is it? Here we are. It was paragraph 15, preceded, of course, by paragraph 14, the obligatory paragraph that says how wonderful our roads are. This is on page 49.
Nice to you to say so, Max. Thank you.
I believe it. And the worst thing about Staffordshire is all these speed cameras, which we're supposed to like, of course, so I shouldn't say that.
Yes. Can we
okay.
minute that comment? Staffordshire is the real devil to drive through, because every road you go down in Staffordshire is 10 miles below the national limit.
Mm. You can get round it by going via Derbyshire, but never mind that. Okay.
Let's hope not Staffordshire are watching this. we might get a letter. Anyway.
Paragraph 15 is, of course, referring to the least harmful in terms of air quality, CO2 and NO2 and so on. Recycling. And I'm puzzled by this, because I'm not quite sure why we are measuring satisfaction of cycle routes, because by and large cycling is a choice rather than a necessity. And it's a good choice, but should we not be measuring the number of people using the cycleways as an indicator of the satisfaction, as well as an indication of the benefit to the environment? And then we come, we've got an index of satisfaction which is quite a long way off our target, 47%. But then we say that the mitigation or the actions that we're taking is to encourage more people to cycle, which possibly could increase your dissatisfaction. So are we trying to increase the number of people cycling, or are we trying to drive down the dissatisfaction? There's a conundrum there, and I think, like some of these things, it's not very clear what we're trying to do there and why that is the target.
Ian?
Yes, Max, as you know, we've been working very hard for many years around cycling. One of the things that's often reported back to us is the reason why people cycle is their satisfaction with the facilities that are provided and how we maintain them. That's one of the questions that we then have surveyed as part of the National Transport survey, which then enables us to say, okay, are we looking after the things we've provided well, because if we don't do it well, then less people cycle. We do monitor cycling around the county. We have a number of counters, but of course, as you can imagine, if you wanted to count on all of the roads and all of the cycle paths everywhere we do, the levels of cycling, we'd never be able to do that. Even to do the cordon surveys on the dedicated cycle facilities, one of the things we're trying to do, a bit like Holland has done over many years. No, I like grants, thank you. We provided off-road facilities which we put the static counters on. We also sample survey on the roads, but what we are trying to do is make the whole environment safe for people to cycle. So yes, we do count cycling, but it's one of those areas, it's very difficult to gauge across Leicestershire, as we've tried in the past, the number of people cycling, and as a true indicator. Satisfaction with survey and will people cycle is one of the ways we do it. I think it comes down to the expectation of what those users also want. When you're on a bike, and unlike when you're in a car, you want to be able to just travel along, not be stopped ever, have everyone give way to you, have the most perfect dedicated facilities. Unfortunately, in this country, we don't provide those Dutch-style standards, and that's something over the last 20 years we've been slowly moving towards, but it is a long process.
Max, you cycle, correct? You support. You're a keen cyclist.
Yeah,
so what's your satisfaction? Just on a personal basis to the committee, you cycle. What is your satisfaction?
It's actually very high. I mean, I cycle to County Hall occasionally, not that often, and perhaps probably second as far as Corn, you don't have to leave the main, so there's a lot of cycleways up in Loughborough, and the quiet roads, for example, from Mount Sorrel to Cropston, are extremely pleasant to cycle along, so I'd recommend it. And I'll see you.
I'm thinking about buying a bike, but I've got to get a big one.
Yeah, the roads are particularly good. The cycleways are not so good.
Well, we've got some satisfaction there. Not everywhere.
Yeah.
Sometimes through Melton it's very difficult because we've got small roads and a lot of congestion.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy my cycling, and particularly in the summer, I've got quite a nice bike, and I'd agree with that. I'm the first person to come back to the department and moan about specific roads that have detritus and all sorts of other residual debris littered to the side, particularly where developments are taking place, and it's just something that needs managing. But again, I attended a session at Nottingham to do with automation of cars, automotive vehicles, and Oxford Council presented, and outside of Holland, I think Oxford in our country has the most amount of cyclists, and one of the things they reported to us is that since 1960s they've had a great deal more cycling. They haven't seen an increase in their traffic movements within the centre, but they've got very little data on cycle movement, so they've just started to put smart cameras up to try and capture data across their area, so they can further improve their cycle routes. So again, I think it's an issue for all authorities that are either trying to encourage more cycling or actually have quite a lot of cycling. We need the data to try and work out how best to place the resources, and we're probably, in all fairness, lagging behind Oxfordshire in that respect. But it's a point well made by Max, I think.
Ian?
Chair, sorry, I know there are other members want to, but just taking you up on your offer, we do have a large sample size of bikes available at County Hall, which we're always looking for people to try before they buy, including electric bikes. So if you'd like, I could arrange a session with you to loan one, and you could use it for a while, plus instruction as well.
Instructions.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it quick. I'm very aware of the fact that lunch is after me. First of all, I just want to say this report obviously shows the sheer breadth of work the department does, and I'd like to take the opportunity to sort of commend the officers for the work you do, and it is genuinely appreciated. We obviously, part of our job here is to scrutinise what the department does, but there is I think the report shows that the quality of the work that we do is good. The quality of the roads is good, has been mentioned around, and I just wanted to say that from my point of view. Thank you to you and your team. In terms of the Appendix A, I looking down at keeping people safe, do we look at, we've talked briefly about sort of what the police report and the way they report it. Do we sort of then delve down into the causes of the accidents? Now, obviously, some accidents will be caused by things that, you know, potentially our fault. We haven't kept the roads up. We need more signs, less signs, whatever. Some accidents, you know, are caused for things that are beyond our control and realistically would never be within our control. Clearly, those things are not, by its definition, are not within our control. Do we drill down that far? And if so, are they reflected in any way in the figures?
Very briefly, Chair. Yes, we're very reliant not only on all the information the police give us for the causation, but all the contributing factors. I'm glad to say that it's a very small amount that is actually attributed to the road condition. However, often we're looking then for how we can engineer or enforce. It's having read accident reports for many, many years now, it's quite sad some of the reasons why people have accidents and what happens, especially if they're on their own driving along rural roads. Causation is the only way that we can find out the reasons why we can do something. And I know often when members of the public write to us with concerns about an area and we report back that there's no specific pattern that we can do something to fix it, they sometimes find that hard to understand because they just see the cars in the ditch or so forth. But that is the only way, and you're spot on how we can identify the right things to do, be it the surface has gone slippy, the signs may not be in the right place, giving the right warning, or drivers are just driving wrong and we need to do something different. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Really just a question. The school clear zones, which obviously started in April, and I know are rolling out, and I've got one in my division, which is going to be interesting to see how that works and what improvements it makes. Can I make one additional plea, which is once we've had a chance to see what difference additional road markings and enforcement has to parking outside of schools, that we also possibly extend the study to actually look at school entrances in residential cul-de-sacs. Because I know in particular there's a school I have in my area where the keep clear signs have gone in. It's actually in a cul-de-sac. It's not on a main road. It's actually just off the main road. But actually, it's the small cul-de-sac associated with the school and the entrance that actually is probably the biggest problem, because actually people tend to go in there if they flow in there, but then they can't get out because they actually all block each other in. So they'll keep away from hopefully the keep clear signs and the keep clear areas, but actually they'll still end up causing horrendous problems within the cul-de-sac area itself, trying to sort of shunt in and out and knock each other over and all sorts of other things. So it's just really, again, whether we can actually look at I appreciate, we try things and then move on. Just in future years, whether we can actually review that as a way of seeing whether there are certain black spots that we can actually try and improve with dissipating the school traffic to a wider area.
Thank you, Jonathan. Is that over to you, Anne?
Yeah, I'll have it, and Ian can obviously add if there's anything else he needs to add to. I mean, firstly, the zigzag keep clear in the moment, as you're right, quite rightly say, that has started, and we have got more schools signing up to that as that's going on, and we get more publicity, which is brilliant. So we're ensuring the lines and signing are entirely in compliance, so we can enforce them with the camera car. The point I would hasten to add on that is not about catching people, it's about deterring people from doing it in the first place. Don't park there because it'll cause an issue, a safety issue or an obstruction issue. Don't park there. So if we deter people, that's brilliant. That's what we're trying to do. In terms of extending it to the type of thing that you're describing, I would say it's not part of that trial. That's a specific thing to deal with the zigzags and the school keep clear, and we have under legislation and guidance, we can specifically enforce that in a certain way. The other issues, perennials, whether a cul-de-sac or in a residential area, we have over the years, and we will continue to work with schools who are proactive in terms of having a travel plan. How can we deal with these things? We have actually got a pilot going within our Access Fund area, which is a joint thing with Leicester City, for a school keep clear zone, and that actually includes traffic regulation orders to exclude on-street parking at certain times of the day. What we've got to remember, and it's particularly challenging when you've got school right in the middle of a residential area like that, residents have certain wants, needs, etc. in terms of parking. So if we're restricting it because of school times, it impacts them and their visitors all the time, every day of the year, etc. So it's often a balance and a compromise as to what you can do. Overall, however, what I'll say is we work with schools where they are proactive. We, have a finite amount of resource on this, so we have to manage it. It is always a drip because there's new parents coming in, new pupils every year to the school, so there's a whole other education thing, isn't there? But we're more than happy to work with schools where they're proactive. We've got a limited amount of resource, but it's not always an easy one to crack, as I'm sure you'll appreciate from some of the issues that come up in your area as well.
Jonathan?
Just a quick follow. I absolutely appreciate that the school in question, I know has been extremely proactive, and I was a governor there for 8 years, and I saw it from the other side as well. But likewise, obviously being cul-de-sac, they're designed to different road width standards, etc. And as a result, rather than actually having a full two-way road width, we actually have something that is probably 5 meters rather than a sort of 6.5 meter wide, etc. And I every single time I go in there to talk to residents, I always feel for them, because actually it's not their fault, really. But at the same time, it's not the schools. I mean, some of the parents are physically violent to even some of the traffic wardens that go around. Unfortunately, with some individuals, the only way of really deterring them is to actually fine them. And it would be quite nice sometimes just to have the method to do that.
I think it's important, though, and I agree with that you're going to get the lowest common denominator sometimes who are going to break the rules, but it is deterrent. We've got to think of that. And there was something happened in Melton, and there was a few newspaper articles as if it's good to fine people, when saying, actually, is it good to fine people? No, it's not. We need to deter them. And that's what we're doing. So from this group, we must be saying it's to deter. The last thing is that we actually smack fines on people who I'll guarantee won't pay it. Then we end up, you know what happens, we've been there, done that, you end up spending a lot of money, a lot of time, and then you end up not receiving any money back. They'll say, well, I ain't got the money, I'm not paying it, and then it doesn't do what it was supposed to do. I think deterrent for most of them is the key. Bill? Have you... Sorry about mistake. I'll call you both, but is that the right name?
No, don't worry. No, just...
It's David, but I always call you Bill. Your last name, forgive me. Forgive me, David.
You come from a long way away. Don't worry about it. You put me off.
Sorry, David. You started the ball rolling about this shopping centre.
I've got half a dozen things to ask about, but I think if I just sort of rattle through them, then perhaps the officers could...
Get back to you.
I'll put them in writing, yeah.
Yeah.
This business about congestion, which is right at the top of the thing, I find it hard to believe that businesses are now more satisfied with congestion than they were a year ago, because my perception is that congestion grows worse by the day, and I mean, others have talked about this, and you have as well, Chairman. It really does get worse and worse. So either we're not talking to many businesses, or they're being very quiet about it, or for whatever reason. And it's not just, of course, it's not just county roads. It's Highways England's roads, which anyway, there's an issue there which I think we've got to go into further. Air quality. Very much agree with what Dan was saying about heavy lorries. We are at the heart of the distributive industry set up round here, and we've got lorries coming at us in all directions. And I think even if it's not of a concern to the rest of the country, it should be of concern to us here in the heart of the Midlands. And I think we ought to, I know we're going to look at air quality, but I think we've really got to pursue this question of pressing for modern lorries to be coming onto our roads. There's that one. A major one is this report here, which has come out, the A46 report, which I find it is full of environmental challenges for us, very drastic challenges. Are we at liberty to talk about this now? Because I see it's embargoed. It says it's embargoed until 0001 7th of November. It's not very clear whether that's the 7th of November or the 17th. It's issued today. Ah, well, it says what's the one for then? 1 minute past midnight. Right. Okay. Anyway, look, there are some serious
Can
issues.
I say will be an agenda item, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I think it's been released. I think a bit of time to read it, have a look, and then we can discuss it.
Yes, but there are some real problems with that. There's a reference in the report, Appendix A, to HS2. I have dropped you a line, Anne, about this morning because reports are coming out from that Mr. Grayling has said it's not necessarily going to go ahead at all. So we really do need to check that out, because if we're going to spend £400,000 on mitigation measures,
That's a very good point, David. Very good point, David.
Be wasted, as so many of these schemes are. We go, so many times we've built up public interest in an issue, and then all of a sudden it's not, it's gone. And the last 2 points, which are local ones to Hinckley, the Rugby Road Hinckley Hub crossroads is mentioned in here, and it looks as if, and according to the report, we're going to see it started in May 2019. Could we please be involved as local members on the design and the consultation? Because it didn't happen last time, and a mistake was, real mistakes were made, and I think there ought to be as much local involvement as soon as possible, so that we get it as right as possible this time. And similarly, further on, I'll drop you a line about that anyway. And further on, there's a reference to Stoke Road Puffin Crossing, and that's where we've got 4 schools all using the same road. Now that needs to come to a head sooner rather than later, because there's a planning application for Morrison's to put a new access onto that road, and we really want the crossing in place before we, it all wants to come together rather than be a year later or something. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Bill, quick one. We've got to get for lunch.
Can I ask a report? This report, it's 105 pages.
Yeah.
Okay. Can that go in each of the group rooms, so we've got a hard copy in each of the group?
Yeah. Could we see
please?
that? Could we? That would be done. Yes. Count that done. Thank you very much. Look, that's been an excellent meeting. A lot of good discussions. Just over to.
Just really briefly, if that's all right, and some of those points there Mr. Bill made. Firstly, A46, I'll confirm that our next scrutiny meeting, which I believe is January, we will bring a report on that one. Okay, so we will come back and we can have a detailed discussion then. In terms of HS2, there has been recent media things about, will it go ahead, won't it go ahead? We are literally in weekly contact, if not daily contact, with HS2 Limited, and we have regular update meetings with DFT as well. At the moment, all the information from them is it is going ahead, and we will be operating that way until we hear otherwise from a official source. And yes, we'll certainly update you on the other schemes and take on board the points you make about the Hinckley Hub and the the Stoke Road Puffin Crossing, not the Stuffing Crossing. Just apologies.
Okay, I'd like to thank everybody. A lot of good contribution, a lot of good discussion. We've got 45 minutes. Could you please be back prompt in this room at 2 o'clock for the afternoon session? Thank you. Enjoy your lunch.